If you ask the people of Lebanon and Warren County who their representative in Washington is right now, they'd likely answer the 2nd District, Gene Schmidt, or the 3rd District, Mike Turner. But all that changes after the November 6th election because of redistricting. All of Warren County is now in the 1st Congressional District, along with the western side of Cincinnati and Hamilton County, plus many of the northern and northeastern suburbs. There are 2 candidates seeking that 1st District seat this year, Republican incumbent Steve Chabot and Democrat Jeff Sennard. Chabot is an attorney who has served in Congress for 15 years. He's a former teacher, member of Cincinnati City Council, and a Hamilton County Commissioner.
There have been numerous calls for the repeal of President Obama's health care plan. I would like to know what elements of that original bill would you use to form a new foundation for a health care plan you'd feel comfortable supporting?
That's a very good question, Tracy, and I did vote to repeal the health care bill, or Obamacare, but there are parts of it that I would like to keep. For example, allowing students up to age 26 to stay on their parents' insurance coverage. I think that's a good idea. Doing something about pre-existing conditions. That's a good idea as well. But unfortunately, we're seeing that Obamacare is killing jobs. It's keeping a lot of new, especially small businesses, from hiring people. So we need to repeal it, but replace it with good things that will actually allow people and help them get quality, affordable health care.
We'd like to expand one of our locations, but the banks aren't loaning any money right now. What would you do to help ease this credit crunch?
A lot of people are having that problem, Matt, and one of the main reasons is because of the additional regulations that was done under President Obama. For example, Dodd-Frank, there are more regulators that are looking over the shoulders of bank officials and making it tougher for them to loan out money. Basically, we need to have small businesses have access to capital so that they can grow and expand and create jobs. And that ought to be probably the most important thing, single thing that we focus our attention on, and that's growing this economy and getting Americans back to work again. And small business folks like yourself, in my opinion, are the solution to that problem.
With millions of Americans still facing foreclosure, what new ideas do you have to keep people in their homes?
Yeah, there's a lot of folks, Angela, that are really hurting. A lot of people underwater, meaning that they owe more on their homes than they're actually worth. What I had done and will continue to do is work in a bipartisan fashion. I worked with John Conyers, who's a very prominent Democrat in Congress, and I'm a Republican, so this is one of the things we need to be doing is working together. And we introduced a bill which would allow bankruptcy judges, for example, to reduce the interest rate on homes in certain cases. Now, the banks didn't like that, and a lot of my Republican colleagues didn't like that either, but I felt we needed to get something done to actually try to keep people in their homes. Because when a person has their home foreclosed in that particular neighborhood, it affects, obviously, that family most directly, but it also affects the whole neighborhood and other property owners in the area because the property values can drop down. Sometimes the building ends up, they'll rip out the copper and steal the stuff, basically. And you'll have an abandoned building there that can be an attraction for drug dealers or sometimes individuals that are homeless or otherwise, and it can be a safety problem in the neighborhood. So keeping people in their homes, helping them to do that, is critical.
With record high gas prices being eclipsed daily in California, what would you propose to relax the regulations preventing fossil fuel exploration in the United States before these prices extend to the rest of the country?
We have to get gas prices down, Matt, and being in your business, you understand that probably as much or better than most other people. And I agree with what President Obama said about this, and that's that we need an all-of-the-above approach. But unfortunately, I think some of the actions from this administration, for example, blocking the Keystone pipeline, don't make a lot of sense. So that would be one of the first things I would do, is get that pipeline open so we can get that oil from Canada down to the refining area in the United States and keep most of that here. Otherwise, the Canadians are going to build the pipeline across Canada, and they're going to ship that oil to China. We can't afford to let that happen. But when I say all of the above, I mean we also have to promote wind and solar and biomass and thermal and nuclear and a whole range of others in order to get us less dependent on foreign sources of energy. And that's the problem right now. We have to buy too much from the Middle East, places in Africa like Nigeria. They may not necessarily be friendly to the United States, and we're dependent upon them. We have to be less dependent on other countries and to replenish and to drill and to go after energy sources we have available to us right here in the United States. Shale oil, for example, in Northeast, especially Ohio, creating thousands and thousands of jobs. We have to do it in an environmentally safe manner, but we've got to do it, and I say sooner rather than later.
Our public schools are increasing the rigor of instruction and expectations for students in line with the Common Core that's being adopted nationwide. What structures will you build to get feedback directly from teachers, principals, and students about these efforts?
Well, Gail, thank you for being in the education field. It's obviously one of the most important fields available to us out there. Getting specifically to your question, I don't think the direction should come from Washington, from the Federal Department of Education, for example. We ought to allow the money and the power and the resources to be at the state and local level. Parents and teachers and local school boards are the answer, not the bureaucrats up in Washington. I'm a former school teacher myself. I taught the 7th and 8th grade in an inner city school in Cincinnati, and then I also taught in the political science department at the University of Cincinnati. So I'm very pro-education. And we need to make sure that it's actually the people involved in education that are making the decisions, not the nameless, faceless bureaucrats up in Washington.
A college education has become a requirement for many students to find a career in their later life. But we all know it costs a lot. Some families can't afford it, and others end up with a large amount of debt when they graduate. What can you do to help change that?
Yeah, the young people right nowadays are having a heck of a time because when they come out of college, sometimes, you know, it's 50, 100,000, even more in debt from student loans. We've got to do something about that. And also, we've got to do something to get this economy moving again, because about half of the students graduating nowadays either can't find a job at all or can't find something in their field. I think this administration made a big mistake when it basically depended upon the government to control all student loans nationally. We need the private sector, we need competition to keep tuition rates down. Also, the federal government is directing more and more money to colleges around the country, and that has actually had an inflationary effect because the rates have gone up. You know, when we send federal dollars out there, they get soaked up, they raise the tuition because they figure students can afford to pay it because they're getting federal dollars. So I think competition in the private sector relative to student loans is one of the best things that we can do to get tuition rates down so that we can once again make college more affordable to more people in this country.
I have children, and Congress keeps spending trillions of dollars and then passing the debt onto her and her generation. Do you find this to be immoral just to support a government that is bigger than what we can afford? And if so, what do you plan on doing to make the tough decisions to stop stealing from her generation and to come to a balanced budget?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Cindy, and I do think it is a moral issue. And we should, number one, pass a balanced budget amendment. I'd like to think that Congress could be disciplined enough that it would live within its means without the necessity of amending the Constitution. But if you look back historically, they're going to spend whatever money and then some that they have available to them. So a balanced budget amendment would require that Congress not spend more money than it takes in, just like American families have to do. And one other thing I'd like to mention so that you know I'm not just talking the talk, but actually walking the walk. There's a group called Citizens Against Government Waste that keeps track of every member of Congress, and now they have voted in wasteful spending, whether they voted for or against it. And in this most recent Congress, which is over the last 2 years, they just came out, and out of the 435 members of the House of Representatives, there were 3 that were tied with the top score, the best score in the entire Congress, and I was one of those 3, along with a congressman from Texas and another from Georgia. So I always look at the money that we spend up there, the hardworking folks back here in Cincinnati and in Warren County and in this area work hard for their dollars, and we ought not to waste those dollars in Congress and up in Washington. And far too often, a lot of that money does get wasted. So I'm going to continue to fight hard to make sure that your tax dollars are protected.
It appears to voters like me that there is gridlock between the White House and Congress. What would you personally do to break that logjam?
There is a log jam. It does need to be broken, and I have worked in a bipartisan manner, will continue to do so. I've introduced a whole range of bills, not just on my own, but always looking for a Democrat co-sponsor so that we can work together. That's the way that you get things done. Now, the House has passed a budget each year, but as we're supposed to, but the Senate under Harry Reid has refused to pass a budget because they don't want their members to have to vote on anything controversial that they might get attacked with in the election. That kind of thinking needs to be put aside. We need to have Democrats and Republicans working together for the good of their country, not just for their own political benefits. And that's the way I've always operated, and I'll continue to do that.
It seems like a lot of the leaders that we send up to Washington tend to lose their moral compass once they get there. How are you going to behave so that I know as a voter that you're not going to become another statistic?
Well, I think my record speaks for itself, Brian, on that. We've never had a hint of scandal, and that's because I know that I represent the people here in our community, and that we ought to be able to look at our kids, for example. And in my case, we just had our very first grandchild about 2 months ago. And I think that we should hold ourselves, to at least the same standard as every other American has to be held to. And I think when you look at some of the things that have happened over the years with some of the scandals, even up to the level of presidents, that's just not what we ought to do. We should be role models when it comes to morality to our kids and our grandkids, and I always strive to do that. I talk to my pastor back at our church on a fairly regular basis, and try to stay grounded. I come home every weekend so I can be with my wife and with my family, and talk to other folks in the community. And I think most other members of Congress try to do that as well. There are obviously instances where people do things they shouldn't be doing, and that's most unfortunate. But even though I think Congress spends too much and oftentimes goes off track, I'd like to think that most people try to do what they should be doing, and for the most part do, although there certainly are exceptions.
If teacher performance standards become mandatory, what do you think will be the overall impact upon a child's education?
Yeah, I think we should, Caroline, have higher standards for our teachers. We ought not to allow subpar teachers to be educating and taking care of, after all, the most important assets we have in this country, and that's our children. They are, after all, literally our future, and we'll be paying the taxes and paying for our Social Security down the road. So teachers should have, they should be held accountable. I like merit-based pay increases, for example. Some folks don't like that, particularly some of the teachers' unions don't necessarily like that. But I think teachers should be rewarded when they do well. If they're graduating, kids at a better level that have a better education skills, whether it's reading or math or science, I think that we should acknowledge that and we should reward that. On the other hand, if teachers are operating at subpar levels and they're time and again just not making the grade, I don't think that should be acceptable either. We ought to get rid of those teachers that aren't doing the job, because it's not like a business where they're just competing and you either have a little better widget here or not. You're talking about our kids, and it's their future. And we ought to hold them to certain standards, and I'll consistently support that. Thank you. It's been an honor to represent the people here in Cincinnati in Congress for almost 16 years now, and prior to that to represent the people here both on the Hamilton County Commission and on Cincinnati City Council. I think I have the experience, I think I have the record showing that I act in what is in the best interest of the people here locally, won't let them down, and will always be honest. I stay in touch with the folks here in the district, and I'll continue to do so. As far as what I intend to do, should I be elected to another term, there are a couple of key issues which I'll continue to push for. Number one, we absolutely have to get this economy moving again and get people back to work. Getting people back to work means that we have to make sure that especially small businesses are able to thrive and, yes, make a profit. I think that taxing them at higher rates, more regulations, and that type of thing is not the answer. I don't think government's the answer, but I think government needs to get off their backs. You know, stop all the excessive regulations. Obamacare, for example, very expensive, is a burden. It's one of the reasons that there's so much uncertainty out there as to what's it going to cost these folks next year if they hire more individuals. And a lot of small business folks have told me the reason they're not hiring anybody is because of that uncertainty. What's the cost of Obamacare going to be on them? What additional regulations are coming down the pike from Washington? So we need to make sure that we get off their backs and let them be successful so that they can hire folks again. And I think another key issue is we got to get the spending that's now out of control in Washington under control. Far too much of the people's money is wasted, and we need to balance the budget, and that's why I'm a proponent of a balanced budget amendment. We need to vote against and stop the wasteful spending. I do that, and that's the reason I was rated as one of the top 3 members of the entire Congress out of 435 members, according to Citizens Against Government Waste, for voting against wasteful spending. And we got to make sure that America is respected around the world. I happen to be on the Foreign Affairs Committee. I'm the chairman of the Middle East and South Asia Committee. And what is happening right now in the Mideast is a really horrific thing. An ambassador killed 3 other Americans. The reason I think you see all that happening in the Middle East right now is because there's a power vacuum there. The United States is in many ways pulling out, not as engaged on the ground, and we're seeing that vacuum filled by elements which are very dangerous to the United States, especially Iran, and they're on the verge of getting nuclear weapons unless they're stopped. So it's a dangerous world out there. We need people who have experience in the international arena to make sure that the United States is protected around the world, and that therefore we're protected here at home, because we saw not too long ago when the Middle East, you know, you might think it's way over there, but if you ignore it, it can affect us right here in the United States. So we need to make sure the American people are protected. That means a strong foreign policy, which I don't think we have under this current administration, quite frankly. So I just want to thank the folks that have supported me in the past, and thank you for your vote in the past. I'll continue, whether you vote for me or not, I will continue to work hard for the folks here in our community. I always look at every issue that we have facing us when it comes to a vote on 2 things. One thing, what is in the best interest of the country, and what is in the best interest of the people here in our area. And I always look at things like that. I always will. And I would just like another opportunity to continue to work for you in Congress. And thank you very much for listening.
If you plan to vote in person on November 6th, but you're not sure where your polling place is located, contact your local Board of Elections for further information. Tom McKee, 9 News in Lebanon.